The Mongols went down in history as invincible conquerors who swept away everything in their path, but the Mongol army was by no means a homogeneous horde of nomads. On the contrary, a significant part of their troops consisted of representatives of many different peoples. Without these people, the empire of Genghis Khan would hardly have been able to reach such a scale. Today, we will take a detailed look at the important role these non-Mongol warriors played, how the great Khans used them, and why many of them joined the Mongol conquest campaigns, either voluntarily or by force. We will also talk about how the Mongol military system adapted to local conditions, incorporating thousands of soldiers, craftsmen, and engineers into its structure, who helped bring the ambitions of the steppe rulers to life. Let me remind you, you are on the Amazing History channel, together with those who truly love history. We continue our series of episodes about the Mongol conquests. Support my work with a like, a subscription, and of course kind comments. This helps the channel grow. And of course, if you wish, you can show your appreciation with a donation on Patreon or by sponsoring on YouTube. Now let's discuss this episode's topic. Let's go. Even during the struggle to unite the Mongol tribes, Temujin relied on troops of very diverse origins. Although they were all nomads and were skilled in archery and horseback riding, not all of them spoke Mongolic languages. Numerous Turkic tribes fought in his army, among whom there were even Eastern Christian Nestorians, who were influential in many steppe communities. For nomads, ethnic boundaries did not matter much. Tribal names initially indicated not so much language or origin, but rather clan affiliation, as well as political alliances, which could easily change depending on circumstances. That is why the Turkic tribes who submitted to Temujin, especially after he took the title of Genghis Khan, quickly became part of the Mongol identity. They adopted Mongol hairstyles, clothing, and even traditions, just as it happened in earlier eras. For example, among the Huns, or in the Turkic Khaganate, where various nomadic peoples merged into a single political entity. After the proclamation of the Mongol Empire in 1206, Genghis Khan began rapidly expanding his territories, incorporating new peoples into his army. Many of them spoke Turkic languages and had different ways of life. Among them were nomads, semi-nomads, and even settled farmers. The army included forest tribes from the Baikal region, the Yenisei Kyrgyz, the Uyghurs, the Karluks, and many others. Some of these peoples played an important role not only in military affairs, but also in the administration of the empire. For example, the Uyghurs turned out to be indispensable allies of Genghis Khan. They not only provided him with experienced scribes and officials, but also shared their script, which was adapted for the Mongolian language and is still used in Inner Mongolia to this day. Thanks to the Uyghur administrators, the Mongols were able to govern the conquered territories more effectively. However, despite the expansion of the army's ethnic composition, its core remained unchanged. Genghis Khan relied on cavalry. In the early steppe campaigns, infantry was considered more of a burden than an advantage. For swift strikes and sudden raids, which formed the basis of Mongolian tactics, mobile horsemen were invaluable. But the situation changed when the Mongols encountered the large sedentary states of China. In the struggle against the Tangut kingdom of Western Xia, the Mongolian cavalry demonstrated its superiority in open battles, but proved to be ineffective during the siege of fortified cities. The Mongols had no experience in conducting long sieges, lacked the necessary technology, and, unlike the Chinese and Persian armies, did not have developed engineering units. This became a serious problem, and Genghis Khan had to look for new solutions. Gradually, the Mongols began to use the resources and knowledge of the conquered cities. They involved specialists from settled societies and adapted their expertise for their own purposes. This is how the formation of a new, multi-layered army began, which allowed the Mongols to conquer not only the steppes, but also the cities. Genghis Khan achieved his first significant victories over the Jurchen Jin Empire, thanks to the mobility of his cavalry and unmatched mastery of archery. However, he understood that military superiority alone was not enough for a final conquest. To conquer such a vast and densely populated country as Jin, it was necessary to exploit the internal contradictions of its society by pitting some groups of the population against others. The Jin Empire was a multi-ethnic state with three main peoples who differed in origin, language, and social status. First, the Jurchens, a Tungusic people from Manchuria, ancestors of the future Manchus. They were the ones who formed the ruling elite of the empire, controlling the army, administration, and key resources. Second, the Khitans, a people related to the Mongols. Once they ruled northern China and Mongolia during the Liu dynasty, but were conquered by the Jurchens. Although many Khitans remained in the Jin army and administration, their position was second-rate, which caused discontent. And finally, the northern Chinese, who made up the majority of the population. They were engaged in agriculture, crafts, trade, and formed the backbone of the settled life of the empire. The Khitans were key in the Mongol conquest of the Jin Empire. Even before the invasion began, many of them secretly started siding with Genghis Khan, providing him with intelligence, guides, and even soldiers. After the conquest of their own dynasty, the Liao, the Jurchens barred the Khitans from gaining promotions, humiliating and pushing them out of the privileged layers of society. This created tension among the Khitans, which the Mongols skillfully exploited. In 1211, when the Mongol troops invaded the lands of Jin, the Jurchen rulers tried to prevent a possible Khitan uprising by settling Jurchen colonists in their territories. But this step had the opposite effect. The Khitans rebelled, proclaimed the restoration of Liao, and immediately pledged allegiance to Genghis Khan. In gratitude, he granted the Khitans significant autonomy and included them in his army as allies. Thanks to this, the Mongols not only gained additional troops, but also weakened the Jin army, which lost a significant part of its cavalry. The Khitans did not limit themselves to participating in wars against the Jin. Their heavily armed cavalrymen also proved useful on the western fronts of the Mongol conquests. In 1218-1219, when the troops of Jochi and Subede were returning from a campaign against the Merkits near the Caspian Sea, they unexpectedly encountered the army of Khwarezm Shah Muhammad II. During the battle, Jochi was wounded and almost captured, but he was saved by a decisive counterattack from a Khitan prince who served in his personal guard, the Keshik. This episode only confirmed and emphasized the importance of allied peoples in the Mongol army, but perhaps even more significant was the mass inclusion of northern Chinese in Genghis Khan's forces. It was they who played a key role in enabling the Mongol army to master the art of siege warfare. Mongol commanders tried to avoid heavy losses among their steppe horsemen. Each nomadic archer was the result of many years of upbringing and training, and in field battles, such horsemen were practically irreplaceable. However, sieges of cities required enormous human resources, and using elite cavalry to storm the walls would have been an unjustifiable waste. Chinese troops filled this niche. They were responsible for transporting siege engines, filling in moats, operating catapults and battering rams, as well as performing the most routine tasks during fortress assaults. In the early years of the conquest, tens of thousands, or perhaps even hundreds of thousands, of Chinese were mobilized into the Mongol armies, forming a new class of warriors specialized in siege operations. Moreover, the Mongols also adopted Chinese technologies. They had at their disposal powerful catapults, battering rams, and explosive charges developed by Chinese engineers. Later, the Mongols spread this knowledge far beyond China, using it to capture cities in Persia, Rus, and even in Europe. To be continued. Although many Chinese were forced to participate in wars on the side of the Mongols, they were often used as cannon fodder, sent ahead to absorb enemy arrows. However, it cannot be denied that a significant number of Chinese voluntarily joined the side of Genghis Khan. This process intensified especially after 1215, when the Jin dynasty abandoned its capital Zhongdu. Many saw this as the loss of the mandate of heaven, the divine right to rule, which deprived the Jin dynasty of legitimacy in the eyes of the Chinese population. By 1219, when Genghis Khan set out west against the Khwarezm Shah, there were more Chinese fighting on the Mongol side in China than there were Mongols themselves. Some Chinese troops were under the command of Mongol, Turkic, Khitan, or Uyghur officers. But a significant portion was led by Chinese generals who had sided with Genghis Khan, such as Shi Qianji and Zhang Ru. These commanders not only served the Great Khan of their own free will, but also showed exceptional loyalty. Shi Qianji and his family remained important military leaders of the Mongols up until the reign of Kublai, and Zhang Ru played a significant role in the conquest of China. He especially distinguished himself in the war against the Song dynasty, where he commanded Chinese troops fighting on the side of the Mongols. Thanks to him, the Mongols were able to adapt to warfare in the southern regions, which were less suitable for cavalry. While Genghis Khan was fighting in the west, Mukhali was left in China as a governor to keep the Jin troops under constant pressure. From 1217 to 1223, he conducted a brilliant, highly mobile campaign, striking at the weakened Jin Empire. The core of Mukhali's army consisted of Mongol and Turkic troops, as well as Tungusic horsemen. However, in other provinces of China, he entrusted command to local allies, who fought fierce battles against the Jin, expanding Mongol territories. As a result, most of the battles on the devastated Jin territory were not between the Mongols and the Jurchens, but between the Chinese themselves, who fought on both sides of the conflict. The situation was especially complicated in the eastern part of China, where an anti-war uprising broke out, known as the Red Cloaks. Here, field commanders, some independent, some supporting the Mongols, others loyal to the Song dynasty but all hating the Jin, fought both against the Jin and among themselves. Some, like Li Quan, sided with the Mongols and fought against the Jin and Song for decades, for which they received high positions and rich rewards. However, his son Li Tan remained an influential regional warlord until 1262, when he rebelled against Kublai, probably bribed by Song emissaries. This rebellion signaled to the Mongols that they needed to strengthen their control over the Chinese military leaders who served them. Despite the tightening of Mongol control, the importance of the Chinese in the army continued to grow, especially during the war against the Song dynasty. In the southern humid regions of China, which were less favorable for cavalry, the Mongols organized a huge army and a river fleet that included many Chinese. The Mongol army in southern China still had Mongol cavalry as its core, but was increasingly under the command of people from Central Asia. In the decisive campaign against the Song dynasty, when the last Song emperors fled to the island of Yaishan in 1279, the united Mongol-Chinese army was commanded not by a Mongol, but by a northern Chinese, Zhang Hunfan, the son of Zhang Ru. The Mongols' conquest of China would have been impossible without Chinese soldiers, siege equipment, and fortification storming expertise. The Mongols provided strategic leadership, but it was the Chinese troops who made the siege and conquest of cities a reality. The Mongols also actively used Chinese labor. Cities in Mongolia, such as Karakorum and Chankay-Balgasun, were built by Chinese workers. Chankay-Balgasun served as an industrial and agricultural center managed by the Chinese, providing supplies for the Mongol armies passing through western Mongolia during their campaigns. The Mongol armies in the west included more than just Chinese members. As the Mongols advanced through the western steppes, Turkic tribes were gradually incorporated into their forces. During the lightning-fast conquest of the Karakitan state by the commander Jebe Noyon, the local garrisons mostly accepted Mongol rule without resistance. However, there is no substantial evidence that they participated in Genghis Khan's campaign against Khwarezm. In the Khwarezmsha state itself, a significant part of the army consisted of Kipchak Turks, and many of them, at the invitation of the Mongols, willingly left their posts to take up arms against their former masters. As I mentioned earlier, Genghis Khan widely used forced mobilizations, driving the local population ahead of his troops, as was the case in China. However, as the Mongols gained more experience in siege warfare, the need for such deserters diminished. Now the Mongols could simply use captured people in the most vulnerable positions. After the end of Genghis Khan's bloody campaign, the attitude towards the local population changed. The Mongols began to recruit them for garrison service. Regional commanders appointed by the Mongols rarely had a large number of nomads at their disposal. Therefore, when suppressing uprisings in conquered lands, it was not the steppe Mongols who took the first blow, but the local militias formed after the conquest. The Western campaign of Batu and Subedai provided several vivid examples of the use of foreign troops. Chinese siege engineers actively used catapults during the siege of Russian cities. Tanguts took part in the capture of the Alan capital, Magas, fighting side by side with the recently recruited Alans as part of the Mongol army. When a Mongol detachment was captured in Austria, the locals were surprised to find among the prisoners an Englishman who served as an interpreter and envoy with the Mongols. People were forcibly relocated in the opposite direction as well. Russian, Kipchak and Alan warriors were sent east to serve in the Mongol army, often as bodyguards. It was believed that relocating such warriors would ensure their loyalty. A young Kipchak, for example, would hardly learn Chinese well enough to conduct secret negotiations or escape, which meant he would remain completely dependent on the Khan. After the collapse of the unified Mongol Empire, the Western states' dependence on foreign troops only increased. In the Ilkhanate, Georgians and Armenians were widely used, especially as heavy cavalry, which played an important role in battles against the Mamluk Sultanate. Some believe that this was due to the superiority of the Caucasian cavalry, but it is more likely that the Mongols still sought to put foreign troops in the most dangerous positions to preserve their own forces. Kublai's last campaigns especially vividly demonstrate the growing dependence on non-Mongol troops, who perform tasks unsuitable for steppe cavalry. While the main Mongol forces guarded important regions, such as the borders with Central Asia, his naval expeditions were mainly manned by Chinese and other local troops. For the invasion of Japan, the Koreans built a fleet and operated part of the ships, especially during the first expedition. The main forces consisted of northern Chinese, Yersians, Khitans, and Mongols. During the campaigns against Dai Viet, Champa, and Pagan, the Mongols fought side by side with former Song troops, and the army included soldiers from Yunnan and the small states of the southwestern border of the late Song dynasty. During the campaigns in Vietnam and Java, Chinese ships and crews provided supplies. The Mongols were never a homogeneous army. In addition to the troops mentioned, tens of thousands of people from different parts of Eurasia served in auxiliary roles. Local scouts pointed out routes. Blacksmiths and craftsmen from Central Asia made and repaired weapons and equipment, and Chinese doctors treated the wounded. Although the main combat strength of the Mongols came from their elite cavalry, it was their flexibility and ability to use the knowledge and traditions of others that allowed them to go beyond the steppes and conquer most of Eurasia. Well, that's all from me. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next episode.